So this week we say goodbye to a legend. And yes, he's had his highs, he's had his lows, he's had his good moments, he's had his not so good moments. But overall, I can surely say that if you say he was that player that was trying to challenge the top two of the last generation, Leo Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, I would completely agree with you. And if you say he doesn't, it's Karim Benzema. Okay, yeah, fine, that's cool too. But there's no doubt that he's in that conversation. There's no doubt that you have to have him in that conversation. It's an obligation to be able to have that conversation, to have Luis Suarez amongst the best players of this past generation, top 4, 5 of the last generation, for sure. It's sad because the more you see that type of player leave, the more you start seeing what's left. And maybe football, I don't know, the future doesn't look that bright, to be quite honest with you. But then it's not, hey, let's be sad because he's leaving. It's be happy because he was there. And we've seen some tremendous performances by Luis Suarez, a player that is hyper competitive to sometimes even a defect. And we saw that on many occasions, and we saw that in maybe some of the most unpleasant situations. But besides that, because we have to take the good with the bad with certain players, and we have to talk about that. But mostly, it's the overall legacy. I mean, if you start pinpointing little things, and then we start really looking to destroy and tatter someone, and it's not the point of this video. It is part of it, but it's not the entire spectrum, and it's not the entire portrait that has been painted throughout a glorious career. Copa America, I think it was 4 league titles in La Liga. He won in Ajax. He was successful at Groningen. He was able to win a League Cup over in England with Liverpool, but it's a far cry Liverpool side than it was maybe this year or the past couple of years or during the latter stages of the Jurgen Klopp era. So it's a very different team. And that being said, Luis Suarez was able to have Liverpool fight for the Premier League title until the very end back in 2013, 2014. You ask me, maybe better than Thierry Henry in terms of, maybe not longevity, obviously, but in terms of what he offered his team and the team he was playing with. I'd put Luis Suarez in terms of the best performers in the history of the Premier League, in the history of La Liga, in the history of Football Club Barcelona. The numbers alone speak of what he did at Barcelona alone. Just the numbers. No, there wasn't an earthquake. That was just me just hitting the camera, but no big deal. Luis Suarez is that. And at the national team level, he was that as well. All-time leading goal scorer. He has a chance to score his 70th this coming Friday when Uruguay faced Paraguay, a very diminished Paraguay side. Of course, let's not even talk about Uruguay with all the suspensions that they have. Suarez will probably get some playing time. I wouldn't even be surprised if he starts and maybe gets a couple of goals in his 143rd and final cap, which will have. It's easy to now say he's retiring. You understand what I'm saying? It's very easy to say what's about to happen. He's retiring. It's going to be very difficult the moment that he steps off the pitch and he said he's retired. It's a different notion that goes through your head, a different set of emotions that come through. And many of us will start to say, oh man, you know what? Damn. And we're starting to do that now. Many of us. And I'm not included. I've always been a fan of his. I've always been, someone that's kind of looked to see what he's done and why he's done things. But now, many have been won over, seeing what he's done, seeing how he's played, seeing how he's competed. Maybe he'll have that blood in the eye of not getting out of the group stage in Qatar just a couple of years ago. Yeah, not the best way to leave. And knowing what's going on in his career and also in his health, because that's been something that's bothering him throughout. His knee has been bothering him for over a decade. Keep in mind, let's remember the World Cup in 2014 and how he arrived to that World Cup. Of course, with a knee injury, he wasn't 100%. Uruguay ends up losing the first match to Costa Rica, and I happen to be at Sete Lagoas, at the complex it's a beautiful complex, beautiful area, just out in the open. It's basically countryside, Sete Lagoas, with, of course, 7 lagoons, and people would go, and enjoy the outdoors there. Uruguay weren't able to enjoy that particular day, I can remember, as many members of the English press were just hawking around, going inside, trying to find, is Luis Suarez playing? How is Luis Suarez? What's going to happen with him? Everything happened to be about Luis Suarez, especially facing England just a few days later. And it seemed very confrontational at times with what was going on with Luis Suarez, heading to Barcelona, leaving Liverpool, the knee issues that he was starting to have, and everything that went on. Of course, it was a very tense atmosphere because Uruguay going into that match, it was do or die. They lost to England, they were done. And of course, they come back. Luis Suarez goes and is able to get a double. Uruguay beat England, basically knocking England out of the World Cup for all intents and purposes. And of course, then everything else happens. I remember I mentioned it on the podcast on GSPN just the other day that I happened to be at the Mineirao for England, Costa Rica, a match that absolutely meant nothing. I just happened to have tickets for it, and I went with a friend, and all of a sudden, sectors of the stadium just started growing. Nothing was going on in the match. England and Costa Rica ended up 0-0. Costa Rica had already won the group, basically, and you hear this proverbial groan throughout the stadium. Nothing. They're playing in the middle. Oh, the game must be that bad. Everybody's going, no. People were on their phones, or whoever had access to some type of decent connection at that time at the Mineirao. The connection was very spotty. I didn't know what was going on. It was a guy that was sitting in front of us that actually says, mate, do you know what just happened? We're like, no, what? What happened? Luis Suarez just bit Chiellini. And that was the proverbial groan throughout the stadium because, it was surreal. I didn't see it. I didn't see it firsthand. I was being told at the stadium, and people were reacting to it. England fans were reacting to it. Yeah, maybe some Costa Rica fans did too, but we weren't sitting in a sector where there were majority Costa Ricans. So it ended up being that, and then of course I have to go again to Sechelagos and eventually see Luis Suarez being dragged out of the Uruguay complex by FIFA officials and Brazilian military police, and he's escorted out, and of course that was the end of his World Cup. It was that. It was stories like that. It was stories like, of course, him going to Barcelona and basically starting one of the best striking partnerships alongside Neymar and Messi, and of course them winning the treble a year after, and everything that went on. Suarez eventually becomes the third all-time leading goal scorer in Barcelona history, but also the way that he ends up leaving, like many other idols that Barcelona have left through the back door, embarrassed, kind of, discarded, jettisoned in the most embarrassing of ways. And Messi would kind of end up going that way too, unfortunately, in Barcelona. And that's the story of Suarez from one end. I mean, there's a lot of sadness. That second goal against England, he ends up dedicating it to the physio from Uruguay, who a couple of months later, he ends up passing away after going through cancer. And he said that was the inspiration to get me through those tough moments. But it wasn't just that. It was the knee injuries. It was the recurrent knee issues that he had. It was him slowing down, but still had the wherewithal to understand himself in a positioning sense and being able to continue competing. It's leaving Barcelona, heading to Atletico Madrid, and winning the league title at Atletico Madrid the next year. So it shows you the competitive beast that he was. He fought for the Pichichi that year, but of course it was Karim Benzema that ends up winning it. And mind you, all of this he's basically doing at this stage of his career in one leg. I mean, on one knee, basically. He ends up going to Gremio, has all the issues with Gremio. It's like, well, I'm here. Gremio ends up investing a boatload of money on Luis Suarez. So much so that some of that money at some point, they were thinking about, they were even talked about having to return it when Luis Suarez was about to leave. He ends up sticking it out for the first year of his 2-year contract. Ends up going into Miami, and many in the U.S., well, he's old, he's just going. Well, yeah, that is true. He's old, he's on one knee, but still in MLS, he's able to score, and he's on pace to surpassing 20. Maybe he'll get to 25 goals. Now, if you count the playoffs, that could be even more. So there's all that. with Luis Suarez, a player that marked a generation, that ends up winning the Copa America, being the player of the tournament in Copa America, having another strike partnership that ends up being one of the most memorable ones alongside Edinson Cavani. Sadly for Cavani, he retires, not much fanfare and not much hoopla or not much recognition from the fans because he wasn't given the opportunity. And him and Cavani ended up becoming one of the most feared tandems in football, in international football in particular, for well over the larger part of a decade. Actually, you can even say since 2007 when they're both at the Under 20 World Cup. So, mind you, they grew up 5-6 blocks from one another. That's what ends up being the scary part. You have those types of players just living, a couple of blocks down the street from one another. So, it's one of those things where it's a different kind of leadership. It's a leadership by example. It's a leadership where he was willing to do whatever it took for the team. And if it meant him not playing, then so be it. Although there were moments that he wanted to play. I mean, don't tell me that an elite level football player wants to sit on the bench all the no. But if it means for the good of the team at that moment to sit on the bench, he did. It's he's a compelling figure, and he'll have his admirers, he'll have his detractors, there's for sure. But you can't deny the quality that he had. You can't deny how top level Luis Suarez was and still is, and still shows that type of display at Inter Miami. And again, I guess we've all been more fortunate for seeing a player of that ilk. And I one more story that I can mention. Maybe this is not a good one for Uruguayans, but it's a comical one from a certain sense. I'm at the Copa America Centenario 2016. I'm doing commentary in Philadelphia. Uruguay, Venezuela. Venezuela wins that match 1-0, just for starters. I kind of spoiled it for many, although you should know that by now. I think it was the 60th, 70th minute. There's a huge roar that comes from the stadium, from the fans. It was about 3/4 full, but very intense crowd, very interesting crowd. But fans, just go, amazing, oh my God. Luis Suarez is on the bench. He starts running and warming up. I'm in the booth. I'm like, wait a second. I look at my notes. I look at Suarez. I look at my notes again. I look at Suarez. Now, I'm doing Spanish commentary on one end. Who was it? Oh, God. Tony Lockwood is doing English commentary right next to me in the same booth, just so you have an idea. We look at each other. I look at my notes again. I look at Suarez. There's a bit of silence because there's no play. I think they're tending a player, if I recall. All this happens in a span of seconds. Look at my notes, look on the pitch. Look at my notes, look at Luis Suarez. Look at my notes, look at the English commentator. Look at my notes, look at Suarez. I'm like, wait a second. Luis Suarez isn't on the list. Luis Suarez wasn't even on the list. He gets up and starts warming up, getting ready to come in. And everybody's like, that roar lasted very little because then people realize, wait, he can't play. He's not on the list. He's injured. he starts going and warming up and he starts doing the drills. And of course, many of the Uruguayan fans are like, hey, we're losing 1-0. We need Luis Suarez to come in. And it kind of didn't help Oscar Washington Tavares at the time to have him on the bench because it ended up being that type of distraction. Wait, why is he on the bench and he's not playing? And people are like, well, get him to play. Suit him up. And that ends up, of course, Venezuela lose, Uruguay get eliminated. And many start, but Luis Suarez was that, hyperly competitive. Remember, there was another moment where you see him coming down the side. I think it was down his right, coming in towards the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper comes out, and he basically swats the ball in an attempted shot or cross. I don't know exactly I remember what it was, but it's still going straight. It was like a square ball. The goalkeeper hits it. He's telling you, hey, handball. It's those types of things that he kind of maybe got too competitive and lost his head and started trying to look for anything. And those are the things that kind of made you like him a lot more or hate him a lot more. And that's just what Luis Suarez ended up being. And he ends up being that type of figure. And I guess we have to appreciate someone like that because for sure, he made football a much more beautiful sport. Make sure you share, follow, and do everything else you got to do, ladies and gentlemen. I want to keep doing these videos for you a lot more often. Until then, ciao.